Fantastic. Well, let's start because we may have other people joining us, but thank you all for returning again tonight. Very excited to continue on our way with this journey through Genesis. So let's begin with prayer. Okay. Gracious God, we are so grateful for this circle of inquirers, of people who are looking to understand you more fully and to understand the word that you have provided to us through the scriptures. And so grant this evening that our hearts would be open, our minds ready to be challenged, as well as to hold open the way for inspiration. And we are so grateful for your son, Jesus, who guides every step that we take through this journey of faith. And we give thanks for the pilgrimage that we are stepping forward on this evening through Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all. So, Tom Forster Smith is back from his travels. So he was out and about, kind of roaming through the Alps and through Vienna and through the Czech Republic a little bit, but he came back healthy, and I'm delighted to have him home, as is our dog Molly, who is very happy to have him back. And so tonight,
a few tense moments, because you have to take a COVID-19 test and get negative results to be allowed back onto the airplane to come home.
ooh,
And that didn't get, and it has to be within 72 hours of your travel. So I had it all lined up to do it right at the airport yesterday morning when 2 hours before I got on the plane. So I was sweating it out until I got those results about a half hour after the test. But I'm here, so
Excellent.
We're glad for it.
and given the 7-hour time frame, I slept through the whole thing. I got up in the morning and I saw that he was on the airplane. He said, "Yeah, I made the plane." So anyway, here we are.
And,
So with
and if I should be a little blurry or rambly or something this evening, please stop me, because I am a little bit on jet lag still, but not too bad.
Yeah, pretty amazing recovery. So tonight we have asked you to do a little bit of homework, which was to read 10 chapters of Genesis. If you did not get a chance to do that, not to worry, although we really wanted during this opportunity to connect with you through this scripture to really make it a little more rigorous and ask you to do a little bit of homework. So again, I know we all have weeks that we just can't get our time set aside, but I'm hoping that at least you had a chance to look at some of this. Before we launch into the historic portion of Genesis, which begins about at verse 11:30, I wanted to just circle back to say that we're not going to actually go back to the Tower of Babel tonight. And the reason for that is that I think that the material that I gave you in Nanette's sermon, which was really, really interesting, a different read on that really will provide that. If some of you really want to circle back to anything that we cover over these 7 weeks, we can do a kind of catch-up session at the end and cover things that maybe we don't get a chance to do en route through the 7 weeks. But it's just a pace. It's almost like we're just on this path and we just need to kind of keep going, but that doesn't mean we can't pause for questions and have you interrogate this with us. So I'm not meaning to make it sound like we're just gonna not, plow forward and never stop. But I think right now, rather than going back to the Tower of Babel, we'll keep moving forward through these 10 chapters, and we can circle back to that if someone really wants to do that. I did get some comments from a couple of you through the week. Thank you so much for those. In particular, Sylvia and Penn sent me some really interesting perspectives and some feedback on what we did. And so I'm very grateful to you. And I really would, Tom and I are very open to having you send along responses so that we can respond and have the richness of what you're bringing. So, and also invite you to bring forward any of the research that you're doing on your own within these texts. So thank you very much for that. So as we did last week, and those of you that were unable to be here last week, I'll just let you know what we're doing. We're really doing a kind of dual focus to this study. Part of it is historical and narrative and what we call exegetical, which is looking at the text and pulling out of the text what it is that are the major themes within these narratives, within these stories that show up all the way through. And part of the work we're doing is theological. And by that, as I described last week, it really is trying to discover in these early chapters of the very first book of the Bible, answer the question or begin to explore the question, who is God? And how is God being revealed to us in many different ways through these passages? And sometimes God doesn't show up in the way that we expect God to. We have these kind of familiar understandings of what we think God is as loving and steadfast, faithful, caring, creator. And sometimes God is showing up in ways of a little more tangled engagement with the people. And tonight in these chapters, we are going to see both and of a lot of that engagement, sort of the intimacy of God engaging with Abraham, with Sarah, with the different players, with Isaac, and with Ishmael, and also God sometimes doing some things that are really, really confusing, and we're wondering what is going on here. So that's the territory that we're moving through, kind of this historic biblical understanding and also the biblical theological questions that show up. So that's the angle that we're taking with this, just so you kind of get a read of what we're doing here, what Tom and I are doing. So with that, I'm going to actually, I want to ask you a quick question before we launch any further. So what key insights from last week or the week before do you carry into tonight? Just if you wouldn't mind just kind of saying, this is what I've been thinking about, or this was surprising, or that was interesting in our discussion last week. Anything come up for you that you remember?
Something that has appeared for me, I guess is the way to say it, is that as I've read, I've thought of times when my mother and dad would say, I didn't think you girls would need this rule, but since you do, here's how it's going to be. And
Okay.
they had expected better of us. We'd fallen short. And okay, now that you need a guideline, here it is.
That's neat. That's interesting. Thank you, Margaret.
You're
So what else? Anything else that came up? That's really interesting.
For me, it was creativity requires destruction. That resonated with me through the week.
Thank you, Ellen. Yeah. The patterns that seem to play their way out into the way that God is engaging. Yeah, exactly. What else? Anything else that has sort of lingered or sort of come as a puzzle, or trying to think about last week or the week before? Yeah, Allison, go ahead. I think you may be muted, Allison, perhaps. I know it's hard. I get tired of this too, but go ahead, please.
I think it goes right back to the beginning. It's the continuing tension between the omnipotent, all-powerful, all-knowing God, and then this intimate God who can approach us, each of us individually, and how we sort out our thinking about that.
Thank you. Yeah. And that really went back, if you remember, to the names for God and sort of the understanding of even naming God as Elohim, naming God as Yahweh, and the difference in a kind of the association, those two early creation stories. But we're going to see this showing up even in what we're reading this evening. And I think Tom will point that out to us. So thank you for that. Yeah,
Liz,
Kathy, go ahead.
One thought that stayed with me from the very early discussion was the two creation stories, and I really hadn't been aware of that. And just setting that how if you take one piece out of context, it's not the whole story. And that there could be two different stories, and that's confusing to me. But it's a new thought to keep in mind as we go through these stories, that there's room for deviation sometimes.
Very interesting. Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really key theme to hold in mind as we're going through this, that there are going to be contradictions. There are going to be a couple of different strains through which we need to look, and to kind of be willing to allow ourselves to have that kind of cognitive dissonance as a way of talking about it, that you're kind of this kind of like, my brain's telling me one thing, but my soul and my spirit, my history of what this tradition is telling me something else. And so to be willing to kind of sit with that cognitive dissonance for a while rather than feel like you got to resolve it really fast. Because I think that's what tends to happen in church, is that people get nervous about something and then you want to just latch onto something and not allow yourself to kind of go into that territory of uncertainty. So why don't we pause there, or I'll pause. My throat's a little sore. I've been talking a lot today in various meetings. So I'm going to just turn it on over to Tom and have him carry us through, at least walk us through these narratives. So hold on to your questions if you have more, and we'll continue on. Thank you.
So Lucy, as we do this, would you put up the Brueggemann chart? So again, hi everyone, it's good to be back. Tonight, my task is to try and weed through the myriad stories that we've got in chapters, basically 12 through 22, about Abram and Sarai and the context in which they lived and their relatives and so on and so on. Can't possibly deal with all of it in 1 week. So I've tried to be guided by biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann, who has written a lot of Old Testament commentaries. This is the interpretation series of commentaries that he has written the volume on Genesis in. So that's the book that I am basing this boiling down, shall we say, of the themes in the Abraham saga. So if you can see that on your screen, I know it's a little bit hard to see, but we've got the progression of the thematic progression from chapter 12 through chapter 22, as Brueggemann lays it out. I want to have us focus on three major themes. Before we do, again, I could, there are so many others. I mean, there's Abraham's hospitality to the angels. There's the family situation with Lot, Abraham's brother. There's the whole saga of Sodom and Gomorrah and what happened there and why. There's the story of Hagar and Ishmael. There's the story of Abraham going down into Egypt in a time of famine and drought. There's the theme of how Abraham kept setting his wife up as his sister, even though she technically may well have been his half sister, in order to protect himself when he was residing in alien lands. Here, take my sister instead of me. We could do a lot with that, but we're not tonight. What we're going to do is look at three themes. The first one would be in Genesis 12, verses 1 through 9, and that's in God's offering the blessing of a promised land to Abraham. God says, "Go forth to the land that I will show you." And Abram at the time responds, or it says, so Abram went as the Lord commanded him. The Lord commands and the faithful person responds. Well, God is in the driver's seat and the human's task is to respond faithfully to God's initiative. again, the theme there, that God blesses human beings with a promised land. And land in Old Testament times was very important, just as we see in Israel and Palestine today. The issue of whose land is it is still a bone of contention. As we said the first time, the Genesis account is truly a very Judeo-centric view of the creation of the world and who's in charge. It's the God of Israel is in charge. Why? Because the Israelites wrote this. It's their version. So first theme, blessing of the promised land. Second theme, that God blesses Abram and Sarai, who are old and barren, with offspring. In other words, God is blessing not only by giving a promised land, but is blessing them by giving them unexpected offspring and therefore a future. So God is promising a land and a future for them. We see this particularly in chapters 15 and then in chapter 17. God makes an eternal covenant with Abram, saying, you may not think that you're going to have offspring, but you are. And no, it's not going to be Ishmael, which that's okay as far as it goes, but no, I've got something bigger in mind for you, something ultimately better, your own flesh and blood son. And we remember how Abram responds, what, are you kidding? No, me? I'm as good as dead. My wife, she's like about 100 years old. You gotta be kidding. The answer is no, just wait, wait and see. It'll happen. And in that part, chapter 17, God actually renames Abram to Avraham, which in Hebrew means father of many peoples. An Av is a father, and the Raham of many peoples. Remember the name Adam, like a mensch taken from the earth. So this, Abram, you're gonna be the father of many peoples. That's what your name's gonna mean. And Sarai, your name's not gonna be Sarai anymore. It's gonna be Sarah, which in Hebrew means noblewoman or even like princess. Your status is going to be raised by the blessing that's going to happen. Just you wait and see. So again, in the second theme, God is offering the blessing of offspring and the blessing of a future. And then Abraham, he's become Abraham now, responds by promising that he will keep this covenant by a sign in the flesh. And this is where it gets very sexist, guys. This is one that probably only men can do. This, the sign of circumcision, that not only he, but his offspring, if he ever has any, and even the resident aliens who live in his land, if he ever has any land, he is going to make sure are circumcised as a sign that they are going to keep the covenant that God has made to him of offspring and land. So today we think, what's the big deal? But this is a very big deal for them in that time and era, to have a physical sign that you have attested to the covenant and you're going to keep it.
Do you have any idea, have you done any research on circumcision in terms of why that particular thing? I mean, why wouldn't they have just like gotten tattoos, or why wouldn't they have gotten like cut in the arm or something? Maybe, does anybody know that? I mean, it seems like kind of a weird question and kind of a little bit creepy question at one level. I don't mean to be inappropriate. I'm just really curious about why that of anything. Does anybody know? Penn, you do a lot of research in these texts. Do you have any idea? Maybe he's not hearing me. Looks like he might be frozen, but anyway,
Austin,
I'll be glad to
great.
do a little research on this instead of that. But why? You know, that's my only question. I'm just
I've never had the
curious.
nerve to ask.
Okay, well, I just
Well,
had the nerve to ask.
just
I just
a
wanted-
guess, just a wild guess, is that something only men can do. Well, that's not actually true though, because there's female circumcision in certain
Yeah, that's
areas of
true.
Africa. But basically, I think it was seen as a male way of demonstrating your faithfulness that only men can do.
Yeah.
So,
curious.
um,
Seems like a big deal, and it's a big deal all the way through biblical text. So, you know, I just wondered if you have any idea. Not to get
Did o-
side.
did other-
New
did-
Testament.
Did
Somebody
other
have any
communities, did other communities do that too? Were there other ethnic groups that had that?
part of the reason they do think was to distinguish themselves from the Gentiles who didn't practice circumcision. We are different. You know, we're visibly different if you want to look. So, you know, we are set off from all the others. And here's the mark of it. We have a God who's made a special covenant with us, and we're going to keep it. And here's the
Yeah, but I
physical.
think the question was also, are there other groups that did do that? I mean, not right then and there at that point in history, but throughout. So I think it's just interesting. It's kind of a sort of a side question at one level, but I was just sort of curious if you knew. Anyway, keep going. Sorry. Don't mean to
So
sidetrack.
then again, referring to Brueggemann's flow chart there, then if we skip to his last box on it, that the covenant is going to be tested. See in his fourth rectangular box, chapter 22, we get to the testing and God's providing. So the faithfulness articulated by Abram is going to be tested, put to the test in a very traumatic way as we read chapter 22. Finally, after all this time, Sarah has a child by Abraham and its son Isaac. She laughed, of course, you remember when she heard that she was going to bear a child in her advanced years. And so the name Isaac in Hebrew means he laughs. So it's like the son of laughter. Again, these names all mean something in Hebrew, and anyone who understood Hebrew would get the word play that's going on with their names. We lose that in English, of course, if we don't know what's going on with the Hebrew language. So once Isaac, the son, has been born, then God puts Abraham's faith to the test by saying, okay, I want you to go take him and sacrifice him, but I will provide. And at one level, we read this story, and frankly, it's really disturbing. It seems that is Abraham being extremely faithful, or is he psychotic to think that God would be asking this of him? But if we get into an ancient mindset, the time when there was sacrifice being practiced, you took your firstborn, you took your first fruits of the harvest, and you dedicated them to God as a way of saying, thank you, and I trust in the bounty that you are providing me. And so Abraham, in this sort of pattern, takes his only blood son, Isaac, and is willing to sacrifice him in this horrible story, until just at the last moment, there's a ram in the bush over to the side, and God provides an alternative. Okay, you don't have to go through with it. You demonstrated to me, Abraham, that you were willing, and now you don't have to do that. Here's an alternative for you. So this raises, though, raises a lot of questions in our minds, I'm sure. One of them, big one, is this promise of God to bless, this covenant relationship, is it only given after the person has proven themselves? Is it by his faithfulness, Abraham, it was reckoned to Abraham as righteousness, and therefore God then allowed him to have a future by having a son who survived and lived to produce other offspring. It's really, so Martin Luther took this 1500, well, about 1550 AD, and raised the issue, is it by our faithfulness that we attain salvation? Is it by our works, by what we do? If we do faithful things, then God will bless us with eternal land, progeny, blessing. Or is it that God offers this first, and our response, faithful people's response, is to live a life of faith in gratitude and recognition of the blessing that God has offered? Luther came down very hard on that second interpretation of it. And specifically, if you have your Bibles, want to look at it, in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. By grace we have been saved through faith, and not of our own doing, for it is the gift of God. That was Luther's rallying cry, basically, which pretty well touched off the Protestant Reformation. Because if you remember the context, in the 1500s, the Catholic Church had gotten to the point of saying that people could buy their loved ones' way into heaven, into God's state of blessedness, by putting their coins in the church coffer. It's called indulgences. Just pay X amount and you can ensure that you will be blessed by God. Luther didn't see that in scripture at all. In fact, he saw the opposite of that, specifically in this Ephesians 2 passage, but it refers back to the theme that's raised in our Genesis passages for this evening. Is it God who initiates graciously and Abram responds faithfully, or is it because Abraham acts faithfully that God then follows through and blesses him with offspring in a future and a land that they can live in? So we can bat that around for the rest of the evening. Lucy, do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, I have one more reflection that I think is really a powerful narrative, particularly in this chapter 22 of the testing of Abraham. And I think it's about trust. So there's this sort of very interesting kind of layered trust thing that's going on. So back in chapter 12, where we started, where Abram has this relationship with God, so trusting the word of God that when God says go, Abraham literally pulls up the tent pegs, pulls in all of the sheep, all the family, and moves forward into the promise that God has made. So there's trust there. Then there's this layered trust of when Abraham is called by God to go and sacrifice his son. And what's really interesting about this, Penn, you know this, that I know you know this, that actually the place where he goes, they think is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. So has anybody been to Jerusalem in this room? Okay, a couple of you have. So you know the Temple Mount, and now there's a great big mosque on the top of that Temple Mount, and that's right by the Wailing Wall. But the tradition is that Moriah, where Abraham took Isaac to be sacrificed, is the Temple Mount. And David made the decision to build the temple on the site where this horrific testing happened. So I think that's just more of a sidebar, but it's a very interesting image if you've been there, and if you haven't, to think about all of the kind of what has brought David, King David, to think about. That's the context to put the temple. But, and so
One
you
other
can
interesting
understand.
sidebar about it, you see, many scholars believe that the story of Abraham and Isaac, the potential sacrifice of Isaac, is from the Elohist source material, not from the Yahwist source material, as we talked about in the first week when we were looking at the four different strands that are woven together into the Pentateuch, and specifically the book of Genesis. This one, scholars do believe, is pretty identifiable by the language it's written in, the words that are used to describe God, name God, that this is the Elohist material, for what that's worth.
Elohim. So it'd be more the distant God, the more standing back away from, not so much the intimate. So maybe it knocks down my idea of trust, but it's definitely the trust of Abraham all the way down from the early text that we were looking at in the very beginning, all the way to this of saying that, I trust you and I'm going to trust. And I believe it's verse 8, where the dialogue then between the trust of the child, Isaac, of his father, saying, Father, you're building this sacrificial place. Where is the lamb for the sacrifice? And what Abraham does at that moment, the trust in God is so deep that he basically says, God will provide for the sacrifice. There's just, I don't know about you, I just almost get choked up when I begin to think about that relationship with that child looking into your face. And then you have this face of this man, who's ancient man, who's taking his son to do what he believes he's called to do, not understanding, you promised me all the way down and now you're doing this. So that whole thing about trusting God that we see in this plays into our own lives, of how we do or don't trust that God will provide for us in the fullness of time, even in moments of testing. So that's another theme that, at least for me, Tom's bringing the theme of covenant, and where does grace come first or does faith come first? And then also some of that is built on this question of where does trust, how do we trust fully in God to be present in our lives?
If I were Isaac,
Kelly,
I think I would expect that. If I were Isaac, I would think I'm going to spend the rest of my life on a psychiatrist's couch. If I had a father that had done that to me, even though the father was doing it out of a pure motive, but oh boy.
Yeah. Kelly, did you have a question or a comment?
When you were talking about trust and faith, I have to look at this, that in his heart, Abraham believed that God would never kill a child or his child. And that's what allowed him to go this far, because I think he thought he's going to stop. God would not do this to me. And I sometimes wondered if God had let the sacrifice go through, what would would his faith have been crushed? But that's how, because this story bothers me. But when I look at it that way, I'm like, he knew God wouldn't go through with it. That's how I have to look at that story. I don't know how other people think of it, but.
Then in quick response to that, think of the connection to our Christian understanding of God and the sacrifice of his own son, Jesus. I mean, there's a big connection there.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
this time he goes through with it.
Well, rather than stay in the large group, because I think this is a smaller conversation, Ellen, could you put us into groups of about 5, please? And the questions are in the chat. I don't know if they follow into the chat room. So let's just quickly run through the questions. You think they do? I don't know. What do you think?
Lucy, what's going to happen is go through them real quick, but we'll see if it takes us, if the chat goes through. If it doesn't, I'm going to cut and paste the broadcast message.
Okay, thank
So,
you. So basically, really quick, when have you stepped out on faith? Thinking back to the 12th chapter, and God says, go. When have you stepped out on faith? Second question, do we have to take the initiative to find God's promise, or do we simply have to follow God's guidance to arrive at the promise? So kind of a complex question, but a great one.
Yeah.
Third one would be, does God only keep the covenant conditionally? That is, if we obey, this is Sir Tom's question, with faithful action, or does God remain faithful to us even without a response in faith? And then the last one is the question about the time of that your faith has been tested, and did God provide for you? Now, I know we have we're going to go about 15, why don't we do 12 minutes? in
Could you give
small
me the
group, if you
power,
would, please?
Lucy? And then I'll make it so.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I will do that. And then, and grab one of those questions, whichever one, we don't have much time. So you don't.
Yeah,
need
you're not
to
gonna be
jump
able to
into
do all of them.
But if there's one or two that you would like to just carry forward, or just have a discussion of what we've discussed, okay? So hold on, I'm gonna make Ellen, hold on here. I think
I'm gonna do 3 groups.
Okay, Alan. Oh, this is interesting. Huh. Oh, Lord.
You just go to the participant
I
list.
don't
No?
see
Or in the
any of us
chat.
being,
Not
It
the
is in the
chat, go to the
chat.
participant list.
I
And
know, but
under me,
we
there
got
should
a
be a
little,
more.
we got a little issue here because none of us are hosts. Okay,
Oh.
there's not a host in the house.
Okay, so you need to
And
hit the claim host button and put the host key in if you know it.
claim host, and I don't know what the host key is. So I think we're in a large group tonight, folks. Sorry.
Okay.
We have a little bit of a thing going with our assistant, and he's the host. So he set the whole thing up.
Lewis
but he
might can
forgot to
find
make
him.
me a host. Pardon me? Yeah, Lewis didn't give me the host function, so we'll do that next week. So let's go ahead and discuss, okay? I know he's
Lewis might
sorry.
know the.
He would have the host key, but he's not here. I can call him, but he didn't give it to me. So I really apologize. We're going to always have little technical moments here. So we're not going to get into small groups tonight. We'll work with that next week and make sure that I have the host key. But let's go ahead and discuss. So what comes to you? In which of these questions would you like to talk about? Anybody can claim it. Okay.
I personally like the initiative one, number 2. That's intriguing to me, whether you have to sort of seek and you shall find, or do you just sort of wait and hope God's going to make it happen? I'm a big believer in you've got to take the initiative to try stuff, find stuff. Where's the joy, right? Find joy And that's kind of how you find God's promise, in my view.
Well, joy reminds me of the psalmist, weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes in the morning.
Yeah.
But that's probably a function of how long I've been looking for a new job since before the pandemic began. And actually, I lost 2 jobs in about 8.5 months.
Yikes.
And in between that, my father died. So I've just been kind of rebuilding since August of 19, and just praying a prayer that I came up with or was given to me in college, that just put me where you want me, Lord. And a couple of times recently, a lady I worked with at the Art Institute, and Christine, has come up with a pair of different chances around Lurie Children's Hospital, one in the gift shop and one being a concierge there. And the concierge, there was very little written in the advertisement, just look at this other place. And then you go to the other place, there's nothing there. Another category, look in this other place, nothing there. Very, very mysterious. So I applied, but just had to tell them what I was looking for. And what I had not been close enough with Christine to tell her about is that I am, well, something between terrified and sickened by hospitals. Because when I was 1 month old, I very nearly died and was diagnosed with a cyst in my brain. I had brain surgery before I was 6 months old. And I remember one time as I grew up talking to my doctor about wanting to be able to talk to people about it, and why couldn't I talk to people about it easier? And he said, you won't have words. You were too young for words. So just the idea of telling this story to so many people at once is a huge step for me. And I appreciate you listening. But in the context of this job search and Christine giving me these 2 apparently suitable job openings, but in a place that I would be terrified or really worried about, I've been praying, put me where you want me, Lord. But now I'm adding, put me where you want me. But is it here, really? So that combination of, yes, I'm going to do what you want me to do, but is this really it? Is really resonating with me right now.
I don't know that I am waiting for guidance, but I always like the Bible stories. I love Samuel when God calls and he says, here I am. I would like, I always kind of think in the back of my mind, someday I'm going to have that chance to say, here I am. But then when I look back at my life, a lot of times I've often thought, not me. So, on minor things, but I just love in the Bible how many people step up and just say, here I am.
First of all, Margaret, thank you for telling us that story. That was brave, and I appreciate it, and relate to times that were really took every ounce of courage in my life, and we all probably do. So thank you for that. The answer I would have on this, Lucy, looking at number 2 is both and or both. But I sometimes think of I have a more kind of a mechanical technical background, and I think of the analogy of it. It's easier to steer a moving car. So often when I've felt stuck, I'm not so good at the let's wait or let's sit on the bench and say, put me in, coach. I start moving and try to be attentive to the leading. So from that standpoint, there are times I definitely felt, for me, I felt more of a call or maybe an anxiety to take some initiative and let the promise unfold.
Beautiful.
Beautifully
Thank
put.
you, Kathy.
Thanks, Kathy.
Craig, did you have something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say that my experience generally has been sometimes you feel like you're in the depths of Sheol and crying out, but suddenly something happens, whether you took the initiative or not, it comes sometimes out of a clear blue sky, a total surprise that turns out to be a very good thing.
That's what I was gonna say, that often I don't take the initiative and God delivers a promise or answers. And I do think some of that's just having faith or not blaming him. But many times he's come through for me and I haven't taken the initiative. I'm almost frozen. You don't know what way to turn or what to do, and then he answers. And that is something very strong that touches me often.
Yeah, it's
That's
powerful.
part of what's keeping me brave about these hospital-related chances that make me think, no, that'd be the wrong place for me. But then why is Christine telling me about them? How is she getting the idea? So I appreciate that, Kelly.
Sylvia, did you have something?
This made me think about our baptism. We don't take the initiative in our baptism, right? And the promise is there. And so then throughout our lives, we are just blessed by the knowledge that promise and guidance is there.
Thank you.
Yes, beautiful.
And were you responding or did you just have your thumb up? Did you have a question or a thought?
I just like to comment on baptism. That's very powerful. And I also like to comment that it's both and. I like that very much, initiative and waiting. Those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength.
They shall rise up with wings like eagles. Yep.
But yet there's something to be said for initiative too. I like both.
Mhm.
Thank you.
They shall run and not be weary, but that they shall run. Yeah.
Thank you. Allison, I'm just watching I'm watching the room. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
A couple of things. Some of us were not baptized as babies. I was when I joined Fourth, and so I found it an interesting combination of invitation and response, so that in answering the questions, I knew that my response had to be gratitude and living out my life in faith through that. And I had one experience where I don't know, I look at it, I don't know if it was initiative or just getting a shove, where I was certain that I was doing something and God was with me through it. And it I don't know that you know it in the moment. It is in reflecting on what happened and what you could do, that you understand that.
That's a good point about in the moment and reflecting. I keep a diary, and I have since I was in 6th grade. And just the idea that I need to write down even the ordinary things that happen has been hard to get used to over the years, because if I look at, say, 1970 something and, oh, well, I wrote something. Don't write about what I wrote. That might be the only reference I have to it. And then, oh, I read to Cheryl what I wrote and she really liked it. Still not saying what it was. So I don't have that evidence. I'm not reflecting. And these days I'm more likely to say I wrote about the death of a mayor or an athlete or somebody, and how much I remembered about him, and how much people were reacting to him. I wrote a note earlier tonight that I'd heard about Queen Elizabeth going to the hospital, and oh boy, here we go. And how momentous that might be because of memories of when my dad and I were together around Easter when her mother died. And he was on the edge of his chair because she had been queen in his eyes since 1937 for his cousins in Canada and Scotland. And suddenly this person was gone. And he was really wrapped up. So just the connection there was a resonance, I guess.
So Tom, what else? Thank
I've
you.
got
Maria.
one little story. Lucy, I hope you are not upset that I share this, but when Lucy had the opportunity to come to Chicago, I wasn't just sure that I wanted to move to Chicago. In fact, there was no way I was going to go to Chicago. I had a bad image of Chicago from the limited experience I'd had in the city. One morning, I was sitting in our condo in Boston, and I opened the medicine cabinet door that I'd done 1,000 times before and had never seen, stuck to the inside of the medicine cabinet door, a refrigerator magnet that said on it, I think it's the person who lived in the building before us, I left it there. I'd never noticed it. The refrigerator magnet said, "Let go or be dragged."
Oh, wonderful.
Oh, God. You hit me right between the eyes. So I peeled that refrigerator magnet off and put it on our refrigerator there in Boston. The next month or 3 that the interviewing process dragged out for Lucy and Fourth Pres, I meditated on that as I sat eating my Cheerios or whatever in the morning. And it was just clear, Tom, let go. Because if you don't, you're going to be dragged. So get over it, go. And I am the kind of person who is reluctant to take the initiative. But when I get pulled up to the edge of the cliff, I leap. And so far, each time I've done that, it's worked out. But you can't see it, how it's going to work out at the time. You just have to jump.
I find that God speaks through a coincidence. Says, Tom, maybe that magnet wasn't there before. Maybe it just appeared that day.
An angel of the Lord put it there in my medicine cabinet. Or maybe someone from the search committee from Fourth Pres snuck into our condo in Watertown, Mass, and put it there for my benefit. We'll see.
Or your previous tenant said, "Oh, I don't need it. Maybe somebody else will."
There you go.
That's probably what it was. She was actually was she a detective or something? So who knows what that meant.
She solved
Sylvia,
that?
did you have your hand up?
Gary and I are in Chicago with a very similar story. So maybe that's how we keep getting people to move to Chicago. God is out there nudging people this way.
Refrigerator magnets on people's line of sight.
Right.
The Holy Spirit needs no vehicles, but can use them if he wants.
How about you, Judy? Yeah, you haven't
Well,
spoken enough.
two things come to mind. One, when Tom was talking about the image of Chicago, when we were first married, we went to the Netherlands and we met a woman, Meen, who, it's actually a wonderful story. During the war, she was a translator, spoke 5 languages, but a church from New Zealand, Michigan, sent a pair of spectator pumps. In the tow was, I think, was it your name? A note saying, would you like to correspond? I will fast forward to when Tom and I and our 2 mothers went over there. Meen and I happened to hit it off. And she had hosted so many people based from this note in the toe of her shoes. And I convinced her to come to the United States. She said, I can't afford it. I said, you have hosted so many people. They want to host you. So she did come. It's 40 years ago. Anyway, we met her at O'Hare. Her friends had taken her to the airport to come to Chicago and then had gone immediately to church to pray for her that she would be safe in Chicago because they were sure Al Capone was going to get her. The other thing, and I will go to the questions, I'm not quite sure what one it applies to, but I have always had what I have referred to as Moses envy. And that is, Moses got to hear the voice of God directly in the
Mm.
burning bush and what to do. At times I have felt that stumbling through the darkness, and then all of a sudden something will happen. And even though the prayers are not verbalized, I've always said that in your head, the prayers are going constantly. And something you will find. And the latest example of that is our granddaughter, Grace.
Mm. Mm. I think it's really powerful. One other side note in this text from that we've read through, that I don't know if you noticed it, but do you realize that Hagar was the slave girl that was sent away by or ran away and then was sent back and then was sent away with her child to the desert, was the first one to name God? Isn't that actually give God a name? I mean, we know later that they say, what is your name? You know,
Mhm.
that, you know, Moses says, well, what is your name? My name is, I will be who I will be, or I am who I am. But
Mhm.
she's the very first to name God. I think that's really a kind of powerful side. There's so much in this text from 12 onward to the end of Genesis that really allows us to again really see God in the multiple facets of who God is in the interaction with the people. And it just gets better and better from my perspective, this narrative, this story does, because we begin to get into the next generation, which we'll pick up with going forward next week. But it's so fascinating to me that we could talk about these stories and we could so find our way into them personally, and how it is in our own lives that God really has brought us face to face with who God is through the narrative of this ancient couple. And, you know, some pretty not very beautiful scenes that happened of Sarah being so mean to her slave girl.
Just
And,
downright
you know,
nasty.
she was nasty. I mean, you know, this was, but also the way Abraham would treat her, to set her up and send her
Yeah.
into Pharaoh's court, and, you know, and basically through a deception. I mean, the kind of way that all this happened, but yet it is so inspiring as well. You know, that, so I just think it says that every one of us bring that. Yeah. What were you gonna say something, Joy?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and you and Tom have alluded to it, that puzzled me as I read this, and I was thinking about, you know, how do the women in this story feel that they've been finding God's promise? You know, Sarah, who, you know, is given to Pharaoh, and I think later on she's given to somebody else also.
Yeah, right. Right.
Hagar is forced to marry him. She has a child. She's cast out, you know, she's forced to return, then she's cast out again. Lot's wife turns to a pillar of salt, you know. The daughters basically have an incestuous relationship with their father. I mean, it's you know, it's a heavy load, I think, when you think about it from that perspective, that
Yeah.
the women don't seem to be getting so much of a promise in these chapters.
Yeah.
I agree. I found them very troubling looking
Yeah.
at it from a
Yeah.
woman's perspective. Very, very
Yep.
troubling.
Yep.
But
Well,
they don't
there's
have to be circumcised, so that's something good.
Okay, that's a plus, I guess.
Yeah, I
There's
guess
something
not.
else that I'm not the first person to say this, I've just discussed, was what Isaac said to his mother when he got home. You know, after he was tied up on that altar.
Mm-mm.
Because I had a little sister and she was a tattletale terribly. So if we took her anywhere, she always told my mother when we got home. So we're sure Isaac said something. And we're sure Sarah said, "You what?" You know, "You what?" So that's, you know. there also to.
Well, I think what you're pointing to, go ahead, Joy, do you have a little more to say? Because I don't want to cut you off. But I think what you're pointing to is that you can take any of these stories and bring a perspective on them. And I think it's interesting from my perspective to look at the role of women, particularly in the book of Genesis, and to kind of listen for that as you're reading the stories as we go forward, because we're going to have Rachel, we're going to have Rebecca, we're going to have all kinds of tangles in the way that women set their sons up to put them in a particular position of leadership or being the number one when they really were the number two. There's all kinds of ways. And there's actually a lot of scholarship around the role of women. One of the scholars that I've read a lot of is Phyllis Tribble, who has actually written a book called Texts of Terror, which is the story of 4 women in the Bible and how they basically were just in terrible, terrible straits. And people find that pretty kind of upsetting or really offensive, but it makes you wonder how these stories get into the Bible. And then how do we work with them, in our lives? And it's not just women, there's so much violence, and God sometimes perceived as being the violent God, the warrior God. I mean, if you all go to the Sunday morning, Tom Dozeman and John Buchanan last week talking about the warrior God, I mean, there's just interesting images here. And so I think tonight what we've done is opened up a lot of questions and tried to figure out how we might be able to put this together. But as I was saying earlier, the cognitive dissonance, to just allow yourself to let yourself hold the way open with the questions, not that we're going to answer them all, but I think that there's ways of being able to come back at them really pretty powerfully. So that's where I'm kind of ending. Tom, do you have something?
I continue to be fascinated by the way that as the Bible got assembled into its current format, what thought process was going on that allowed very divergent stories or even contradictory stories to be included in the one holy book, the Bible. Apparently, it was not a problem for the editors to put these very divergent stories with divergent views of how God interacts with humans into the Bible. And maybe it means that we got to hold, as Lucy is saying, and others, we got to hold these things in tension. We don't have just one answer or the other. We need to be informed by both or more perspectives.
That's evidence of the Holy Spirit, in my opinion.
Meg O'Hara, I don't think you said anything this evening. You want to have the last word here before we close? No? Okay, no problem. I don't want to put people on the spot, but also don't want you to feel like you can't, step forward if there's something I'd say. I don't think Debbie said much either tonight. So very aware. And also Linda Crane, you get a chance to say much either, but we're really at time. And don't want to cut you off if you had one more thing to say. Let's pause for just a moment, but very grateful. So Tom Forster-Smith, do you have the assignment for next week at your fingertips? If you don't, I could probably pull up our PowerPoint.
It's so Jacob and Esau, let's see, one moment, please. We have 2 weeks on Jacob and Esau, and then we go to the story of Joseph, and then we conclude the week after that. But I can't tell you the chapter and verse just right off. We'll have to
I
send
think
that
it's
out.
25 to 33 is Jacob and Esau.
Good.
Okay, 25. And we may have a little homework for you. So we'll get that out to you by Friday so that you have the weekend. What is today? Thursday? Tomorrow. So if we have some, hold on. If we have anything more for you, then we will send that out tomorrow. So you get a chance to look it over. I really would love for you to be able to do some supplemental reading with this, and it's not required. We're not grading you, but if there are interesting articles, I mean, that we could send to you, looking at some of the themes that we've already raised, we'd love for you to do that. So Tom and I will talk before tomorrow afternoon, talk probably after this class, and figure out if there's something that we think would be of importance. Do you enjoy, let me ask a quick question. I'm sorry to keep you longer, but I got to ask one more question. Do you enjoy listening to a sermon or reading sermons, or would you rather have something more around supplemental to textual, the biblical story itself?
I liked the sermons last time. I thought that they gave two different perspectives.
Okay. Okay, so something that would be kind of challenging and that's just one person.
Yes, I second it.
Okay, it's just kind of interesting to see how people lift these texts and kind of move them in a direction. There's lots of stuff, and I have lots of resources around that. So we'll send you out something. Again, you don't have to listen or read it, but we'd love for you to do that, and we'll work that in.
If you said
So-
both kinds, and we could choose which way we wanted to go.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah,
Let's
you've
do
got
that.
them
We'll send one of
handy.
each.
Did you send out some supplemental homework or reading last?
No,
Okay, because
Not this
I
week.
didn't get it. What's everyone
No.
talking about? Okay.
no. But the first week, the second week, we sent out both a sermon and then also Nanette's sermon, and then another sermon, two sermons, Frederick Buechner's sermon but that was for last week, not this week.
But I didn't get that. So I'm wondering if
weird.
my email address is.
Oh gosh, Kelly, we're gonna double,
Yes.
triple check
And
that.
you know how I have all these email addresses floating? I haven't gotten anything.
Okay,
Um,
I'm gonna double check that because I know what your email is, because
Yes, I
you're on
think
all
you're
these
sending it
groups
to
with
my
me.
old one.
So I'll make
Yeah.
sure that Lewis
Okay.
has the most update. And also I apologize about the host thing, particularly to Ellen, because he was all set. So I'll get that all straightened out and we're on, you know.
Okay.
Next week will be the charm. Yes. Judy?
Lucy,
Yes.
I've kind of rechecked, but I don't remember, like Kelly, getting.
Getting
and it
anything?
may be
Okay.
that
Anybody
my,
else? Anybody else before we close?
I
Let
have
me
it.
double check that. And he'll
Oh.
send the link every week. So if
Okay.
you haven't gotten that, let me
Yeah,
know.
that's good.
But
For one, I like the large group. That was a kind of an interesting
Yeah,
change, so.
yeah,
it's
You like
all
the large
good.
group?
Small, big,
Fine.
it's all good.
Yeah.
I agree. I like the large group.
you know
with
how
the-
sometimes you have
wide
groups
range.
and you know how sometimes there's a group and there isn't sort of a respectful engagement?
Mhm.
You all are fantastic. I mean,
Well,
it's
good
sort of
leaders.
like.
Good leaders will do that.
I found
I'm
our
not being
chapters for
critical,
next
I'm
week.
just being honest, you know? And I
Well-
sometimes can be that person of being a real annoying because I want to get my word in all the time. So, you know, but that's
Well,
part of
while
it.
you're getting your word in, I took the opportunity to find the chapter and verse for next week. So it's Jacob and Esau, part 1, and it's chapters 25 through 33, verse 17. So that would be the reading. We'll send it out, but
Let's send it to you.
chapter 25
between.
through chapter 33, verse 17.
So Tom, would you do a benediction, please, so we can close? Okay.
Gracious God, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for the challenge of living, expecting your blessing. The challenge of coming to those points in our lives where sometimes we have to step out on faith. We thank you, Lord, that when we do, you catch us and you open doors for us that we didn't even see were there at the time. We thank you for the writings of old and the stories of Abram and Sarah and their offspring, and how blessing has come to our world through that particular narrative. Help us to understand more than we've understood before. And all this we give you thanks and praise for in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all so much for this evening.
And thank you.
Thank
So
you.
beautiful. See you next week.